Well, I'm very excited to introduce to you our guest today, Scott Lewallen. Scott is founder and CEO of Mesic Media, a consultancy specializing in design, user interface, and user experience, and the branding of products. He is perhaps best known as co-founder of Grindr, the world's largest gay social network. After Grindr's 2009 launch in Los Angeles, Scott became Senior Vice President of Product and Design. He directed all product development in user interface and user experience design and graphic design at the Hollywood headquarters for both Grindr and its sister app, Blender. We'll ask him more about this later. His leadership and his team's efforts defined the brand and helped Grindr grow to the most popular all-male geosocial mobile app from 0 to 6 million users in 192 countries. Seems to me there was a problem to be solved here, and they solved it. He has long been active in the LGBT community, and he has served as art director at E! Entertainment, E! Online, and creative director at Atlantis Events. Scott currently resides in New York City and can be found on Twitter and Instagram. Please join me in welcoming Scott Lewallen.
Good morning, everybody. I've put together a little presentation here, and I hope you find it as entertaining as it was creating it. So that's my overly photoshopped headshot right there, and that is my Twitter handle for my personal account and also my corporate account, Mesic Media. Feel free to tweet, follow, interact. I'm pretty good at answering people. So, hello, my name is Scott Lewallen, and I love design. And I'm guessing that all of you love design too. So here's a little bit about me. I was born in California. I went to school at the University of Southern California. Go Trojans. And shortly after school, I moved to New York City to sort of explore and spread my wings and learn a bit more about design. So I lived in New York for a few years before returning to LA. A few things I like are art, technology, beer, skyscrapers, and sharks, for a variety of reasons. And I've worked at a bunch of different places throughout my career, including many companies in the sports and fitness industry. George mentioned that I worked for Atlantis Events. It's the world's largest all-gay cruise company that charters ships. I worked for E! Entertainment for a while in their branding and art department. And I started my own company called Mesic Media, which I do business under. But I'm probably best known as the co-founder of Grindr, which is the world's largest all-male location-based network. It's basically a social app for gay men to meet each other based on proximity. And I think the coolest part about that is the stats that go on the network. These stats were updated recently with a relaunch of Grindr. It's used in over 192 countries, so that's basically every country on the world except for 2 small islands in the South Pacific. There are 7 million users on the network. They average about 8 logins per day, 2 hours of daily use, 30 million lines of chat sent each day, and 2 million photos sent. So if you think about that for a second, how many hours in a day you have to work, do school, take care of yourself, eat, and sleep, averaging 2 hours on the network is a pretty huge accomplishment for us. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Grindr or who have never seen it, it basically looks like this. The app experience is 3 essential screens. You get a grid of people. It shows you who the guys are nearby you. You can tap on each thumbnail to show you a profile for that individual where he can fill out some information about himself, his age, his height, his weight, and so on and so forth. And then you can choose to interact with that individual. The version you see up on the screen is what we originally launched, and it actually went through a renaissance and it was recently relaunched. While the features have been changed and improved, the core and essence of the app remain the same. So here's what the new version looks like. Full disclosure, I left the company in March to sort of pursue some new projects. And so a lot of what you see here is stuff I worked on over the last few years, but the team there is amazing and strong, and they did an excellent job sort of bringing our product roadmap and the seeds we planted to fruition. So It's very exciting to see something you created go through the evolutionary process and evolve and relaunch into what it is today. So, did I mention that I love design? Yes. We're going to talk about the process of design, or rather, my process of design, what I've learned throughout the years and what works for me. I call it my methods of madness. So, I'm going to take an idea and do a little use case to shed some light onto my process. And that use case is my sister was going through photos of running through a pumpkin patch with her children, and she said, wouldn't it be cool if we could take all of these photos and put little pumpkin jack-o'-lantern faces on us? So I said, oh, that would be really cool to just sort of figure out a way to turn that into a mobile app in a way that I could share with all of you. So the idea is I want to be a pumpkin. And when you take that idea and sort of get in there and understand what the idea is, it then becomes, I want to turn my face into a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween. So how would we go about doing this? How do I get this jack-o'-lantern face onto a photo? I was with my partner this last weekend walking through the gardens in Boston Common, and I said, hey, what if I wanted to turn us into jack-o'-lanterns? And how would I do that in an app? So it's time to brainstorm. So what I normally do is I first think about what would the product name be? What would the essence of the product be? So if you have the word jack-o'-lantern, you can start playing with ideas jackalizer, jackify, jackogram. And I use Instagram a lot, so I thought, oh, jackogram is kind of cool. It resonates with the audience. I get what it means. Maybe you guys would too. So let's go with jackogram. So how about a brand? How would we translate into that into something that's iconic and visual and memorable and something that resonates with the audience who would be using it? So I took my pen and I sketched out a few ideas, and I ultimately came with sort of a heavy, stylized, scribbling look, jackogram, and then I thought we should integrate the face of a pumpkin in there. So here we have a jackogram logo. So that's going to be our branding for this app. So I've got the logo. Now I need to know, what does it look like and how does it work? My process is sometimes in the computer and sometimes out of the computer, but I really believe in the power of paper and a pen. Sometimes it can be napkins, sometimes you might be out with friends at dinner and you get an idea, but the power of paper and a pen is often most beneficial to me in my process as opposed to getting stuck staring at a computer screen. There are lots of tools that allow you to iterate on the screen, but I like to first get my hands dirty in the real world. So what does it look like? Let's sketch out a few screens. When you open this app, obviously you need to choose a photo to turn into jack-o'-lanterns. So you can either choose a photo on your phone in the gallery, or you can take a new photo of you and your friends or your family. And then you'll need to be able to pick on that photo where the faces are so you can tell the program what to turn into a jack-o'-lantern face. Maybe the program could do that automatically by detecting your face. Maybe the photo isn't so good, the lighting is off, so you have to actually tap on and select where the face should go. But eventually you've selected the face and you now need to choose what you want to look like. So obviously the next screen would be to pick from a gallery of icons and decide what type of pumpkin face you want to appear on your photo. Once you've selected that, voila, the photo turns into your jackogram. So we've got a series of 4 sketches here, very high-level, rough sketches of what could eventually become an app. How do you turn this into an app? Well, you dress it up. And I usually dress things up in Photoshop. That is my tool of choice. So this is what it would look like after you sort of really get in there and polish the interface and make it look something that could be used by a programmer to turn it into an app. Let's take a look at the screens. So here's the first screen where we chose our photo either by taking a new photo or by selecting one from the gallery. See those action buttons right there. We've also got a color palette that resonates in the spirit of Halloween. We've got some branding up at the top with the jackogram logo. And we've got a little bit of text to sort of tell people what's going on in case they have no idea what this app is. On the next screen, you've got your photo that you've chosen, a minimal UI, maybe a transparent tip bar to explain what the user is supposed to do on this screen. And remember, you're selecting faces, so maybe if the faces are auto-selected, they would be outlined in some kind of rectangle. So we see our photo and we're really happy with these two gentlemen, myself and my partner, who are going to be turned into jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween. On the next screen, probably the most fun screen before the payoff, is the gamification aspect of it. I like to add a bit of fun into every sort of screen or app or product or even logo I design. So on this screen, the fun is the fact that you get to scroll through a bunch of pumpkin faces and decide what to add to your photo. It's fun and iconic. And also, if you notice at the bottom, I put a button that says buy more pumpkins. Part of my job in designing apps and designing products is figuring out a way for a business plan to bring in revenue and make companies profitable as opposed to just existing for design's sake. So sure, we're going to make people happy by turning their photos into pumpkins, but we probably need to make money down the line if we ever want to get some investors or go public or sell to somebody. So the final screen, here's our payout, the emotional payout, if you will. Happy Halloween. That's myself and my partner turned into jack-o'-lanterns through Jackogram. We've got some basic branding and a watermark on there, and of course you can either share this on social networks, you can email it to your friends, you can email it to your significant other and they'll be mortified when they see the photo, or you can trash it if you don't like it. So there you go. We've taken a bunch of sketches and turned it into Jackogram. Oops. One more time. Let's see that guy drop. Jackogram. Halloween fun for your photos. So that's a really quick use case to sort of walk you through my process of taking an idea, wrapping it in a brand and personality, getting some rough sketches out onto a piece of paper, and then giving it some color and some skin and turning it into what essentially appears to be a presented, fleshed out app that can be then developed. So I want to give you 6 ideas for better design that I tend to use in all of my projects, for both myself and for clients. The first and most important idea is solve a problem. If you're not solving a problem with your design, then it's not going to be successful. You need to identify what a problem is and approach it from a place of solving that problem for it to stand by itself. You should know your audience. I'm a firm believer in emotional design and empathic design, and not doing something that simply works for you or is the bare minimum of what you need to accomplish to get the design done. I really believe in getting into the heads and minds of your audience and understanding what they want so that you can achieve what they want and try to please them. Tell a story. I've tried to tell a story today, and I hope it was more interesting than simply going through a bunch of bullet points. When you tell a story, people become more emotionally engaged in what you're saying and tend to remember what you're talking about. So by telling a story, you can really breathe some life and some personality into whatever design project or challenge you're working on. Design a language. When I design projects, I try to come up with a language that is visual and iconic and exists specifically for the project I'm working on. Take, for example, when you design mobile apps, or if you're using your iPhones or your Androids, there are certain languages on the phone that you come to understand mean certain things. When you're working with photos, if you see a trash can, you generally know that the trash can is going to get rid of your photo. When you're trying to message somebody and you see that little SMS icon on whatever platform you're working on, it tends to look like a chat bubble, and you know right away that that symbol means to send a text to somebody. So that's part of a language that's been established on whatever platform you choose to use. I like to show things and not say them. So I believe in designing in a universal language of visuals and icons with as little text as possible, so you can jump the language barriers and really have a universal design that resonates to audiences globally. And finally, the most important thing I do for myself and for my clients is create happiness. If you create a product, if you create a brand, if you create an app or an environment that makes you happy and also makes your clients happy and your audience happy, you will succeed. So don't forget to create happiness. Thank you. I'm Scott Lewallen.
Well, I should start by saying you could have added another point or modified one of your 6 points when you said tell a story, tell a clear, compelling, and succinct one, and you did. That was really excellent. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
You know, there's a as we talked about before we got started, there's so much that we can talk about here, and I definitely want to get into the more, let's say, the broader or wider area of designing apps for anything. But of course, what's so cool about having you as a guest is the whole Grindr experience and the whole trying to translate what we might call the ineffable or the difficult to, you know, we have enough trouble getting our minds around attraction and dating and sex and everything like that before technology. The idea that you would then have to find a way to map that in the technology world, I think, is really cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how, like, what was the environment like? What sites existed before you guys got started? And and how did you tease out what the problem was that needed to be solved?
Sure. So the problem was that I'm a gay man and my business partner was a gay man, and it's very difficult to meet people in the real world when you're gay and single. It's not like you can walk into most bars and just start hitting on guys, because if they're not gay, they probably won't respond well to that.
Right.
So the basic problem was, just getting out of college, living in New York City, and needing, having a need to meet people and not knowing how to do that. So back then, the way we did that was to go on AOL chat rooms, or Yahoo had chat rooms, and there were personal sites, and it was a very sort of anonymous and flaky process. And when the iPhone 3G came out, it had a GPS chip in it, and it was sort of the right place at the right time. So we thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you could launch an app on your phone that would tell you where all the other gay dudes are, and you could start chatting with them, taking away, all the middlemen, all the process, and so that's how we did it.
So now, is yours the first then that used the GPS, used this kind of geolocation for dating purposes?
Yeah. I mean, there were some attempts to do it before in a website situation or a more manual process where you could put in your location, but Grindr took away the manual process. You just turn on your phone, it knows where you are, and it starts to show you the people around you. And we were definitely the first to market, which I believe had something to do with our success.
But I mean, one of the things I think is so interesting about this is that it shines the light so clearly on how the nature of the problem, if you want, is so different, whether it's for men or women, gays or straights. And when you describe this situation, of course, as a lumpen 54-year-old straight man, of course, the world has been designed for my my navigation, without as many aids. Do you know what I'm saying? And the idea that you can walk into a place and it's like it's providing this kind of X-ray scan,
right?
And so you don't have to have what could be complicated and even risky communications, but rather it's just laid out for you. So that's a very specific problem that is extremely different from, let's say, one of the first things that I thought of when we decided to have you as a guest, or asked to have you as a guest, was to juxtapose these two problems, if you will, because yes, they're both dating sites, or yes, they're both, in principle, they sound like the same kind of thing, but the problem was completely different, right? So outline the same kind of geolocating software approach for a straight woman.
So a very, very interesting problem, right? We did have a second product that we came out with called Blender that essentially tried to take the core Grindr concept and expand on it for a general community, not to say a straight community, but just a global audience. And that app was great, and it launched, and it still exists. But I don't believe it fundamentally solved a problem because the problem didn't exist. So when you start applying, when you apply the same solutions that make a gay app work for a very small niche community that's really trying to find each other, and you take it to the real world or mainstream, heterosexual interactions, you guys can still go to bars, you can go to restaurants, you can hit on somebody on the street with very little risk.
Right.
One app that's recently done that is Tinder, and Tinder is simply brilliant. How many of you have used Tinder? Show of hands. No? Okay, check it out. It's really cool. What Tinder has done is taken this same concept that Grindr has, trying to match people based on your location, but doing it in a way that's a game that presents a series of sort of flashcards of people, and you can either flick them one way to like them or flick them the other way to get rid of them. And I think with the heterosexual interaction, there is an element of risk for the females.
Right.
And girls either don't want to be hit on or think it's creepy.
Right.
And what Tinder has done is minimize that risk so they can do it in a way that's playful without bringing some creepy stalkers to the doorstep.
Right. Now, this is so interesting because the challenge is it's almost 180 degrees opposite in a way.
Right.
It's not that, both teams want to find somebody that they want to be with, given. But one team doesn't want, let's say, just everybody to know where they are at all times.
Right.
I think. So I think that's really interesting, but I think it is great. It shines such a clear light on the distinction between two seemingly similar problems, but in fact, from a kind of creative problem-solving, app-making standpoint, completely different.
Extremely different.
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson for us because it is one of the we've talked so much about the questioning the question, trying to make sure you understand what the actual problem is. You and I were speaking about this.
Right.
Oftentimes, designers in any realm will be given a task by their client, and their client thinks they know what the problem is. I need a poster. Come on, will you guys design a poster for me? Okay, well, what do you, now the poster, what is it supposed to do? Well, it's supposed to attract more customers. I see, and what do you do? Well, we do a lot of different things. I see, so who's the poster supposed to be directed at? Well, we haven't really thought about that. And then pretty soon it's a branding and positioning exercise that is completely different than what the client initially thought. Well, let's move into this a little bit. I wondered, you raised the issue yourself about empathy, and I think it was your number 2 on your list of 6 design tips. You called it know your audience, but I think in the language of this course, we would definitely call that empathy. And maybe getting back to, and I guess you've already addressed this slightly, but getting back to this issue about how you design the interface for Blender versus how you design the interface for Grindr. Well, the interface for Blender, as you were saying, is or I guess maybe it was for Tinder, is the one that's more of a game. Mm-hmm. Is Tinder kind of a second generation Blender, or?
They're all sort of in that geosocial app vertical,
right.
But yes, Tinder is probably the most breakthrough thing I've seen in a while. It was interesting when we did Blender, Blender expanded on what Grindr was. So in Grindr, the profiles were very basic. You'd list some basic stats about your stuff in a way that perhaps presented you more superficially
right.
to the other man, seeing if you're attractive.
Right.
But in Blender, we positioned it more on content and quality of content, so people could add more text to their profiles. Right. They could add their social networks. They could even add interest tags, so you could start to aggregate yourself based on, hey, I grew up in Boston. I like to go sailing. Right. I like to go to pubs. So it was a bit more of a rich experience that lets you get into the details about the person, not just the cosmetics.
Right. Well, I guess if you consider, and you know all these applications better than I do, but if the continuum from Grindr to eHarmony, mm-hmm. right? eHarmony is like a novelistic.
Right. That process.
My ancestors did it right.
But it works for that audience, right?
Yeah.
People who go to eHarmony and Match, even OkCupid, mm-hmm. Plenty of Fish. If you want to go to a traditional dating site, you're going to have to tell it a little bit more about yourself because they've got these beautiful algorithms and matching systems mm-hmm. set up that theoretically will tell you, hey, we've served up 5 potential matches that you could live with for the rest of your life.
Right.
And that's what the audience is. It's people who want a lasting relationship as opposed to just casual social interactions.
Sure. And the casual social interactions, though, were made entirely possible by a single technological change, which was the geolocating thing in the phone.
Right.
So it's like, on one hand, person I want to spend the rest of my life with. On the other hand, person who's pretty close by. Right. These are different issues.
Absolutely. The eHarmony experience works great on a desktop computer when you're sitting at home.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to fill out 500 questions on your phone, right?
Right.
Whereas Grindr works the best on your phone. It's not going to do you any good if you're sitting at home and seeing the same 10 people around you all the time.
Right. No, this is brilliant. Okay, now I have to ask about, one of our, you have your 6 words, we have our 8, and there's a lot of overlap. But one of them that maybe you didn't, isn't explicit but is implied in many of yours, is this notion of iteration. And I have to ask, because I'm so fascinated by this. The testing of, did you just have a small group of people that you first tested? I mean, first of all, Grindr was so successful so quickly that it clearly, it was an intersection of technology and unmet demand that, those numbers look like a very successful app to me.
They're pretty unbelievable, again, considering the niche market that it is and also the number of hours any individual has in his day.
Right.
So user testing, that's an interesting problem. I believe when I design things, I usually have a fairly good idea of where I want to go with it. It's not necessarily the right idea, but when I design something, I know what I want to design. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the fact that you mentioned iterate is very important. One of the best lessons I've learned is that I can't become emotionally attached to any of my designs because they might not just work. They might not work for me or the audience, or there might be some press thing with it. So I've learned to design quickly, test it in the marketplace, and if it doesn't work, ditch it. With the original version of Grindr, it was sort of uncharted territory, and we had a lot of luck on our side, right? We launched it, and it took off phenomenally. But the essence of that initial screen, that it's a grid of photos, that was more of just stumbling around the iPhone as it was at the time and saying, oh, I love photography, I take a lot of photos, this would be a great way to present people.
Right.
Rather than just a giant list of text.
Right.
It's much more important to me to see somebody visually, and not just as a gay man, but a human being. I think you can learn a lot about a photo. So it was a natural extension of that photo interface to show people based on their photos. Right. And then we started adding badges and little watermarks and colors and flares to accent and explain what the interface did. So if somebody was online, there was a green dot. If you got a message, a little badge would pop up with the number of messages. When the screen refreshed and it would show you a new batch of people, all the new people that weren't there 2 seconds ago would have a blue glow around them. So that was an easy way to say, I've seen most of these people before, but Tommy down in the corner, he's glowing blue, so that's some new guy. Maybe I should check out his profile.
Right. Oh, this is cool. Well, actually, this business about testing things and don't fall in love with design decisions. In the literature world or the journalism world, I've heard several people talk about the need to, you have to kill your babies, they say. What that means is the most treasured phrase in your 3 pages of text. You can't fall in love with the phrase because the phrase might actually be part of a bit that isn't working. And of course, when you write things, you kind of fall in love with certain, you think, wow, that's such a clever turn of phrase. But their whole point is, no, you've got to be able to jettison those at a heartbeat. But back to the sort of the whole experience of these apps. We talk about UI, or user interface, and UX, user experience, oftentimes just with a slash between them, as though, for example, in when you talk about work you did, that you worked in both areas. But it seems to me they're different. One is maybe a prescriptive, a user interface, and the other one is the result, the user experience. And if they don't match, it's a problem.
Absolutely.
So maybe in Grindr or in some of your other apps, how do you make sure that that the experience is, I mean, is mapping against the interface that you've designed? I guess this is really another question about testing, but how do you know? Do you do focus groups?
I've done focus groups, even with the new version of Grindr that launched. We did some focus groups, and those were extremely beneficial, especially when you throw a product at somebody and don't say anything and just watch how they interact with it. So in that respect, focus groups are useful. I would say focus groups up front aren't necessarily useful because they tend to cloud your direction. So I like to have a focus first and sort of a high-level approach to designing the user experience, what screen leads to where, what buttons should do what, and then grafting on that skin, and then using a focus group to sort of fine-tune your original vision. Again, sometimes you just fail completely and you have to start over, and I've certainly done that more times than I'd like to mention in my career. But yeah, the dichotomy between user interface and user experience, it's really a dance. It's an organic dance that you learn to do. And there are people who do both, but they are separate disciplines, and oftentimes the best way to approach it is to get yourself a team that you work with very closely and understand not just the problem, but the people you're working with, and sort of achieve a natural progression of taking your idea, sketching out the flow, if you will, the user experience, and then turning it into a pretty product that people are going to like and consume.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought your Jackogram
coming soon to an app store near you.
was a great simple walkthrough, and I'm sure obviously there's a lot more steps and sub-steps if we're doing a complex, even just an app like that. One area that I thought probably got very simplified was the degree to which the jack-o'-lantern is going to map onto the geometry and features of someone's actual face.
Right.
Because this could get really creepy, or it could just be entertaining. Like, you have it at pretty entertaining right now, which is, no, I'm just graphed. It's only dimensional, right? You have the different types of jack-o'-lantern faces, and then they are scored so that, underneath the hairline, they work. They're the right shape. But if you really wanted to get evil, it would be more 50-50. It would be like half of the person's actual face and half of the jack-o'-lantern face. The problem is that might not be a result that your consumer would really like as much.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking, when I was doing that exercise, I thought, should I put a picture of me and my mom up there and then show her later? No, because she'd freak out.
Right.
But, there's ways to solve that, especially if you're thinking in terms of monetizing your product. It could say, literally, how bizarre do you want your face to be? And it could simply put, I sort of texturize and colorize the faces, but it could just put the black squares of the pumpkin face on you.
Right.
Or it could start warping and bloating your head and putting a stem on top and doing other bizarre things. And you could even have a slider in the interface that would let the user sort of choose between variations of the degree of bizarreness, right? And sure, maybe it's your audience too. If you want it to be sort of a family, Halloween memory type of thing, you want to dial it back and make it just cute and fun.
Right.
But maybe if it's for some Halloween party on campus, and you just
in real time.
Yeah, in real time, and you want to offend your friends, let's say, hey, you've been jackified on this new app, and I'm going to post it on your Facebook wall, and then they freak out and say, oh my God, why'd you do that to my photo? I didn't approve that.
Right, yeah. I'm actually thinking of the party already. There's a big screen. Everybody's phone can project up onto it for a fee.
For a fee, 99 cents.
Right.
Why not?
Right. We'll talk investment in a minute. There's a lot to talk about here. Visualization, obviously, portable apps are in a way, you said your tool of choice is Photoshop. Of course, I get it. I mean, it's also, now that all those Adobe apps are all integrated, you can do a tremendous amount of stuff just on that platform. When we meet with a lot of other people who have been designing in fields that have existed long before the computer, this whole question of visualization can be really transformative. Mm-hmm. In my field, in architecture, it's changed everything. I mean, not always for the good, mostly for the good, but there's the ability to compose a photorealistic image of a 40-story building in West Hollywood as seen from your window. You know what I mean? And like I can give it unbelievable precision, and that's good when I'm trying to get your vote at a public meeting. It's not so good if I have a finished product too quickly, which is why, for example, you used your ink pen and you were talking about hand drawing mm-hmm. in the early stages of a process where you want it to go straight from your brain to the paper, not through a complicated digital interface.
Right.
So that's interesting. But I want to talk about 3 other topics before we ask our audience for questions. The first is innovation. And this is who isn't talking about innovation these days? Everybody talks about it all the time. But I think that, certainly, I think Grindr is an incredibly innovative app. And I wonder how, in your current, so let's say just recently post-Grindr life, if creating, where you see your work going in the future, is it, because it seems to me to create innovative things requires a certain kind of relationship with clients, and simply performing excellent client service is another kind of relationship with clients. One questions clients a bit more. How do you see your work evolving now?
With regards to clients or just
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, for example, I'm assuming, and perhaps I'm making an erroneous assumption, but I'm assuming that, do you develop all your own apps for your own purposes and then try to get investors? Or do you do contract work for clients?
A little bit of both. I mean, it's that relationship with the client that I think is very rewarding at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. I love designing things for myself. Grindr was very rewarding, but now clients will come to me who often are friends that know me. Sometimes we'll get cold calls and they say, "Hey Scott, we've come up with this product, or we have this product and we're redesigning it. Would you take a look at it and tell us what you think?" Mm-hmm. And so I'll conduct what I consider a design review. Right. Just go through the interface, play with the app, and just give them a very gut reaction and tell them what I think.
Right.
Either your app is great or it sucks.
Right.
And then I'll give them a list of suggestions, things I would do. Say, these buttons go nowhere, or if you got too much text or too many buttons. Mm-hmm. Your user flow is confusing because it looks like it was designed by an engineer and forgot about the human interaction aspect of it. So I've been providing services to people who have products that might be launched or about to be launched or are already widely known, and they constantly want to innovate as well. So they call in somebody like me and say, "Hey, would you take a look at this, and what would you do to improve our service?"
Right. Well, I think there's a huge market for consulting in that area. Mm-hmm. Just unsolicited business advice is that we talked about a site some of you are familiar with called Blackboard. Do you think Blackboard could use Scott's help? I do. In other words, a complete, top to bottom, what are you trying to communicate? Why is every button more or less the same size as every other button? Why is it so unclear what the task is that I'm doing at any given point? Do you know how I navigate Blackboard? And by the way, I'm the one who's supposed to know about it because I'm teaching this class. I go onto YouTube and I watch little videos about how to, upload the assignment or, things like this. And I assume you guys do the same thing. Imagine if with the rest of your life, for example, driving my car, if I had to stop, pull over, go onto YouTube, and how to turn right in an Audi. That would be an inefficient way to, to navigate the world. And that's kind of what we're doing with Blackboard now. And I wonder if there isn't it seems to me there's a massive, as the app and development world has just grown exponentially. How old is the App Store? Less than 10 years old?
It started in 2009. That's when everything took
That's
off.
just incomprehensible, but it is true. So, the idea that people like you, people who have kind of developed your strategic consulting, design, problem-solving skills in that environment, it seems like it's time for some consulting companies to kind of clean up the marketplace, because the good news is it's crazy and everybody can design an app, and the bad news is that most of them are awful.
There's a tremendous amount of noise out there in the marketplace, and I'll be very curious to see where the trends go in the next couple of years. For those of you who have Android devices, there are tons and tons of apps in this wild, wild west of the App Store, and a lot of them are just terrible. Whereas Apple, has a magnifying glass inspecting every single app that goes into their App Store, and the results are obvious. In the iOS ecosystem, it's quality, and in the Android ecosystem, it's quantity. Now, the lines are being blurred, and Android's getting a lot better, but traditionally it's more about sheer numbers versus the quality of a smaller number of items. Interesting about Blackboard, I remember at the beginning of class you said something to the effect of you can only upload one attachment per assignment.
Well, actually, just one document.
One document, right?
Right.
So the solution to that problem is simple. Allow more than one attachment to be uploaded, right?
Right.
Or more than one document. So, and maybe there's a way to do that so you on the client side can merge your documents into one PDF, or they do that for you so that you don't get 10 items from each student. It's, again, that's like a problem that's waiting to be solved, and it seems like a very logical extension of what Blackboard is doing. Now, maybe just the way they work, they haven't thought about the obvious yet, which sometimes is sitting right in front of you.
Well, just a little bit of an aside here is, of course, what Apple has been so great at is editing more than anything else, deciding what we're not going to do,
right,
and then focus on what we're going to do well. I mean, that is absolutely rule number one, it seems to me. And as a result, there's a bunch of stuff they don't do, and the areas they tend to stake out, they have thought about, they do very well. It brings to mind, I used this example in my opening lecture for this class because it's so, in my generation anyway, it's so clear. In the 70s, when the boombox started to happen, well, first there was just a little portable tape recorder. Everybody thought, wow, that's so cool. You could take it with you. And then it got a little bit bigger. How about if we have some proper speakers so you could take it to the beach and play music for your friends? And then you know what happened. And pretty soon it was the size of a massive carry-on luggage bag or bigger. And what did they do? Well, the same basic thing hadn't changed. There's a tape player, which has a play button and a stop button and a rewind button and a fast forward and a pause. And that's it. And volume, maybe bass if you really want to get fancy. But over the years, they had added so many features that, you were hard-pressed to know why they were there. Mm-hmm. But it kind of looked like there was more stuff. That must be better. And then, Sony came out with the Walkman. All of that went away. Everything was tiny. I know the Walkman looks like a giant dinosaur today, but there was a time when that seemed like an amazing reductive technology. Mm-hmm. And similarly, later, when the iPod came out, people said, wow, that's like the Walkman, except it's got all the music you've ever had in your house. And anyway, it was, the only things that you were able to do were things that you needed to do. In fact, what Apple was so smart about was relegating the more complex interactions to when you were on the computer dealing with iTunes versus when you were on your device where you could hardly, they sell iPods and things that have hardly any buttons now because they've made the interface so simple.
Right.
Anyway, it just seems like it's so easy to get, for car aficionados, there's the kind of German car on the one hand and the Japanese car on the other, and even the highest performance Japanese cars have so many features that you have to have a 500-page manual to figure out how to use them. They're great, they're super excellent, but it's not easy to use. And
absolutely.
And that seems like Blackboard is in that stage. Blackboard is in the boombox circa 1978 stage right now, and someone is going to reduce it down tremendously. So there's like two buttons. Are you a student or are you teaching this class? Okay, you know what I mean? It's just going to be.
I mean, that would be an amazing user flow to enter you into the ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like that really, really needs to happen. But I think the people designing it are designing. By the way, the people who designed those boomboxes were not stupid. They weren't at all. They said, you know, boss, I have a great new feature that we can add on. This will add value to our enterprise. This is what Blackboard is doing. You can do more things in Blackboard than I've only been teaching for 25 years, but I haven't done 90% of these things that you can do in Blackboard. So it's one wonders if they're solving the right problem. Metrics. Now this is really, again, interesting because, of course, the default answer to what are the metrics for what you do, the default answer is money. Mm-hmm. Does the thing make money or not? But in the online world, it's a little tricky because did I not read it yet again this week that the largest retailer in the world, I think, which is Amazon the largest retailer in the world now?
I believe there was an article that said second largest.
Maybe after Walmart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Amazon, everybody's darling, but you know, it's one problem. It doesn't make a profit. So like, okay, so it's very successful by all these measures, but it's not actually making money right now. Now that doesn't mean it's not making money. It means maybe it's all plowing it into, you know, being the best store in 2025. But what are the, like, for example, at Grindr, when you started, first of all, you guys started it yourself. You and a couple others started this thing on your own to solve a problem, but also to make money, I assume.
Right.
So how, you know, the first measure, I assume, was users, right? In other words, your first goal was we need to get to, you know, 100, 1,000, 10,000 users. Is that, walk us through that.
So users was the most important initially because in order to have a successful network of any type, you need a critical mass to make the network feel alive.
Right.
You could have the best product in the world, and if nobody's using it, it might as well not exist. Right? So users were the most important thing, and luckily, due to the nature of the community and also the fact that we were first to market and the way people talk and interact, it grew organically.
Right.
And we had to spend very little money marketing ourselves. The second metric, which I think is even more important and is also the most interesting, is user engagement. Because if you have 10 million users and they only check your site once a day for 10 seconds, that still doesn't feel alive. Right. If you have a smaller group of users and they engage the app, you know, like on Grindr for 2 hours on average each day, that number is more important than the sheer number of users that you have.
Right.
And then the money obviously comes in because I tell you, when we first saw those bills coming in from the servers and seeing how much bandwidth costs, it was an eye-opener. And that's when we realized, okay, party's over, we need to figure out a way to monetize this. And we were able to do that.
And how did you do it? How did you monetize it?
The strategy was to offer a free version that essentially provided a network and a community that you could do everything on without being restricted, and then provide a premium version that was separate that you had to pay monthly in order to get better features.
Right.
You could see more people, the annoying ad banners went away, more photos could be exchanged, things of that nature. Right. So, you know, a slightly premium experience for a nominal fee made our users very happy, and they were willing to pay for that.
This is so interesting. This is a meaningful difference. The same thing used by Pandora, Spotify, all these folks trying to solve the problem. How do I get a bunch of users, because you have these competing interests. I need to make money, but I can't scare away users. In the early days of the internet, you know, the news sites, this was really a challenge. They thought they'd been in business for decades. We're Time Magazine, or the magazine that Bill Gates started, Slate. We're going to charge people for content, of course. Just because we're not giving you a physical magazine, we still have writers, we have editors, we have researchers, we have real estate, we have air conditioners, we have to pay these bills.
Right.
So we're going to charge you. The problem was that meant nobody subscribed. And so they were at the wrong side of this. And it sounds like this kind of basic and premium, which is now kind of the default approach to any site that wants to, that needs penetration, market penetration to succeed. the way they go. So I think that's really interesting. And then the amount of time spent on it, is that a metric that's used across the industry?
I don't know if
not
it's
just,
used
I mean,
across
not just dating sites, but let's say, if you were looking at the top 10 apps at the Apple App Store, and you were like running reports on them, how many users do they have? Would one of them be how much time do they spend on it?
I think so, and depending on the app or the network, there are different ways to get that data. But certainly for games, Candy Crush. Do any of you guys have you taken the Kool-Aid and played Candy Crush? It's so addicting and so annoying, and I just love it. But you sit there and stare at your screen for hours and hours, and to that company, that is invaluable, right?
Well, to their it would seem to me tied, anything that's driven by advertising,
Absolutely.
the more you're looking, then it's almost like a Nielsen rating for your app. Yeah.
So yeah, there are a bunch of analytic sites out there, and engagement and the time that eyeballs are actually staring at your app are definitely one of the components to that equation that they give you data on.
Right. So what other, so without tipping your own entrepreneurial hand, what are you planning to, it doesn't look like, if the example you showed is any indication, you are certainly looking to broaden to wider audience apps. What do you see as areas that, if human relationships and attraction and so forth can find its way in these various ways, everything from Grindr to eHarmony on the digital spectrum, can you imagine some other aspects of our analog lives that are going to be mapped onto the digital landscape?
Yeah, I think so. To me, niche markets are the most interesting because there's generally, in a small minority market, there tends to be problems that haven't been solved for that community. So, and obviously, human interaction is an important part of that. So, for instance, for me, I love art. I love all kinds of art. And there are some great art websites out there, but I haven't necessarily seen any apps that allow me to consume and share art. Instagram might be that because at least the people I follow and interact with, it's a lot of hyper stylized photos, architecture, things that I enjoy. But I haven't really found a community for that yet. The entertainment communities, the technology communities are pretty much well covered. But I'd say, of my personal interest, I'm definitely looking at a few things in the art arenas, in the pet arenas, nature, things of that.
Things that people are passionate about.
Yeah, passionate and a small community.
That's really, actually you're really right about both the art and the architecture communities. It would seem to me, when you go visit someplace, if it could geolocate and say, okay, here's, how much time do you have? 3 hours. Okay, here's an agenda for you that you could go. Here's a museum that's local, free, and you can get to easily. And what I mean, that sort of mapped out what your choices were, so that you didn't have to do. It does seem like that's still an area where you have to do a bunch of your own research. Whereas for restaurants, because there's such a quick monetization, that's been addressed. Whether it's from the early Urban Spoon app, if you remember.
Terrific app.
It really was smart because the whole shaking thing made it interactive. How many of you are aware of something called Urban Spoon here? Yeah, okay. So it's smart because it made you feel like you were playing a role in it. Where are we going to go to eat? Don't worry.
Yeah,
I got it covered.
It had the gamification aspect to it as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
One thing interesting, I live near the World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan, and I'm just obsessed with everything that's going on there. They recently had a contest, I believe it was on Instagram, and it said, take a photo and we'll vote on the best photo of the One World Trade Center tower.
Right.
And you've got to post it with your hashtag on Instagram, and then we'll invite you up to the top so you can take pictures.
Right.
Of course, my photo didn't go anywhere, but I was obsessed with that, and it seemed like there was a disconnect for the contest. If they had an app for that specific contest, so you could not only submit and see how you were doing, but see what other people were doing in a centralized location, and maybe vote on it, and start printing your photo on a mug or something. That would be very interesting. Just sort of a geolocated solution to a specific problem that was going on at the time.
Right. One more thing that I wanted to ask you before I open it up to our students is, you know, it seems to me that you've been something of a leader in the LGBT world through your work. Is that something, do you feel like that puts more of a leadership responsibility on you moving forward in your career, in your design career, to continue that work than it does for, you know, the guy who designed Farmville? Is that what it's called, Farmville?
Farmville?
Farmville, yeah. I don't know if anybody plays that anymore. I know at one point people did.
Yeah, I tried to steer clear of that one.
Or Angry Birds.
For the lonely brown cows that came wandering onto your farm. That's an interesting question. I mean, to me, the benefit of being involved in the community is seeing tangible results of helping people. So with regards to the LGBT community, not just with Grindr, but just knowing how hard it was for me to come out and be comfortable with myself and sort of become self-aware and understanding what does it mean to be gay this day and age compared to 20 years ago.
Right.
And so, you know, with Grindr, it definitely let me reach out to people, but I've tried to stay involved in, you know, the USC LGBT community, and even in New York, I'd like to sort of dip my hands into groups that have outreach to people who are less along their life journey or perhaps need some special help.
Right.
But I do enjoy that, and not necessarily just within the gay community, but I like helping people. So that will probably be a part of what I do.
Number 6 is create happiness.
Create happiness. You've got to do that.
Okay, I want to open it up to our students. Folks, do we have questions for Scott?
Don't be afraid to ask the tough
Yeah.
questions. I can handle
Come on now, I just cannot believe that we don't have questions here. Okay, then maybe we should change the assignment so you guys are now obliged to create a social interaction app, a geolocating social interaction app based on attraction. Come on.
Show of hands.
People.
Do you guys, how many of you use Instagram? Everybody. How many of you use Twitter? Interesting. And how many of you are on Facebook like 24/7? Cool.
And I'll ask just because I'm entertained. And how many of you are on it right now as we speak? There we go. Okay, that's fine. It's totally fine. It's already been made clear you do not suffer for that in this class. I'm sorry, did you want to follow that up?
Oh, no, I'm just curious because I find myself changing the patterns of the apps that I use on a daily basis. And I do love Twitter. It's sort of a science unto itself. But I find that when I approach people casually, they're much less likely to use Twitter than they are Facebook or Instagram. And I wonder why. I wonder if is it not solving a fundamental problem that the other two networks are? And how will that affect the IPO and things of that nature? So,
Here we go.
all right.
Welcome.
Hi. I was wondering, it kind of seemed to me like you didn't feel like Blender was really solving a problem. You didn't really feel like it was as successful as, am I not talking? Sorry.
Yeah, what was the first part?
It seemed to me like you said that Blender wasn't as successful as Grindr. So do you have any plans to try to reinvent the concept of Blender and try to really make it as successful as Grindr was?
You know, I wasn't able to sort of pursue Blender in the capacity that I did Grindr, and I think there's a lot of potential in that market. So yes, it's something I'd like to do because I like to bring disruptive technologies to sort of a wide audience when I can, and I think I'll be curious to see where the social app buckets sort of go this year. And by buckets, I mean you've got sort of 3 ends of the scale. You've got your social networking, you've got your traditional romance and dating, and then you've got what I like to call casual encounters, right? And I feel like the mainstream audience keeps sort of tiptoeing around the casual encounters one, and it's really done the social networking and the traditional romance very well. I don't know that there will ever be a solution that does all 3 at the same time in a way that works, but Tinder's certainly pursuing that, and I would love to get back into that space, especially with things like shared interests and finding people based on niche communities and interests that they're interested in.
Great.
So I guess I had a question on Grindr in terms of problem that I guess asking you if it's not solving a problem in terms of, is there not a problem in terms of not having that profile? So is there a need for not such a casual application in terms of casual meeting?
Is there a need for?
Like for the usual dating sites, there are profiles.
Mm-hmm.
So is that not something that community is looking for, to look for people based on a profile rather than just that they're nearby?
Right. So, I mean, Grindr does have a profile, but it's not as extensive as an eHarmony or a Match.com. And I think that is because there is definitely a need for it, but if you look at just sort of the demographic and how gay guys meet and interact, it's much more beneficial to go out and meet somebody quickly rather than get lost in answering 500 questions and then go through the process of, reviewing people. If you answer 500 questions and you get 20 results, then you have to figure out, should I go meet these 20 people? Am I going to have to spend money on a date for each of these 20 people? Then I have to go back and review what the notes were. Whereas if it's more of a casual interaction between you and myself, and there's just a basic profile in between, I can learn more in person. So I don't have to answer my life history. You can ask me those questions when we meet for a drink at the bar down the street. That said, I think the gay community, there are not that many options right now. There are a few options, but the gay community has not embraced them as much as the casual options to sort of do that traditional dating mechanism.
But that's the distinction, I think, that you were getting at, that is really quite stark, whatever one's orientation, which is,
Right.
is this a sort of immediate kind of, are we all at the same bar, hookup kind of situation, or is this a romance and dating situation, which are it seems to be very different problems, no matter what anybody's orientation is.
Right.
They might be more or less connected in people's minds, I think, depending on orientation. But it's interesting, and this is we're getting at the core of what makes this whole suite of applications so interesting. The small differences. It's a way of codifying like that which we don't, let's say, talk about as explicitly. Once you have to write code about it, or once you have to make an app about it, you have to commit to what is the problem you're solving. And the problem the initial problem, it seems to me, was who are the gay men around me? What are they like? And would I be interested in talking with them? And I can chat with them, or I can go, oh, you're 2 doors down at a bar down the street or at the restaurant. I'll come see you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, that's
The problem doesn't exist in the straight world per se, because you already know you can go hit on somebody or interact with somebody. The problem then becomes, is there a better way to do this more efficiently?
Right,
It's not like you can't do it. It's just there might be a better way to meet people than going to the party and having drinks with your friends.
Right. Interesting. Folks? Now, if you could send questions by Twitter yet, I'm sorry we still don't have our act together yet because of me. I'm the entire problem here. So I hope to have that solved in a day. Well, if you could send questions by Twitter, we'd be deluged right now. But in the meantime, Scott, I want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, George.